Elvira and Henry. In Piedmont, North Carolina, many years ago, there lived Elvira and Henry. Elvira's sister was feeling a bit poorly and asked if Elvira would come over and see about her. And Elvira and Henry left. Now, the little town where Elvira's sister lived was quite a ways away. And it was winter time, and Elvira and Henry hitched up the old mule and went on over. They stayed about 2 nights, and old Henry was anxious to get back home and said so, and Elvira said, "But let's just wait until tomorrow." And Henry said, "Elvira, I've got to take care of my critters. Now let's go home." Oh, Elvira said, "All right, Henry." They got onto the wagon, and they started home. That night, before Elvira and Henry could even leave the town where Elvira's sister lived, the weather turned off mighty bad. Why, it started to snow, and the snow turned into sleet, and the sleet turned into icicles on Elvira's nose, 'cause there was not a top on the wagon. And Elvira kept a-yelling, "Henry, it's cold out here. My nose is cold, and my toes are cold, and my stomach's empty. Why in the world would you try and get home tonight?" And Henry would say, "Get up there, mule. Be quiet, Elvira." "Oh, Henry," she said, "why in the world would you make me sit on this old wagon? I'm tired and I'm cold. I'll tell you what, Henry. At the next house, let's stop and see if folks let us sleep in their barn or maybe sleep in front of their fireplace. I'm gonna freeze to death. And I want to get home. Get up there, mule." Just as they rounded a curve, there along the side of the road was a great big house. Well, it was almost midnight, but all the lights were on in the house. And Elvira said, Henry, there's a place. Let's stop there. Let's stop there." "But I don't know who lives there." "Oh, I know it," Elvira said, "but let's just stop." "Oh, all right." So Henry pulled the mule to a screeching halt. "Whoa there, mule." And Elvira stood up and she said, "I'm going to go in here and ask these folks if we can spend the night in their barn. And you find somewhere to put that mule for the night." "Oh, all right. Get up there, mule." Elvira walked over to the porch, over to the door, and knocked. Boom, boom, boom. Way back in the back of the house, she heard a voice. And the voice said, "Come in." And Elvira said, "Oh." And she grabbed the doorknob and she turned the doorknob. It was rusty. And she pushed the great big door open. It was rusty too. And she stepped inside and she said, "I do." And nobody said a word. And she said it again, "Hello? Anybody home?" And nobody said a word. So she walked quickly down the hallway. "Hello, hello." And then all of a sudden, there in a room was a dining room. Oh my, look at it. She thought, food. She walked over to the table and there was a great big turkey, and there was a great big pan of hot rolls, and a great big pot of coffee, and Elvira grabbed a cup and poured herself a cup of coffee and lifted that cup, and just as she stopped the cup in front of her face, she looked over the brim of the cup, and there was another door. "Hello?" Nobody said a word. So she walked over to the door, and remembering the sound that big front door made, she opened this one quickly. And she stepped inside, and there, all around the walls, were shelves and shelves and shelves of books. And in back, there was a huge fireplace and a great big hot fire. And in front of that fireplace there were two great big comfortable chairs. And in front of each chair there was a pair of nice warm slippers. And Elvira ran over and pulled her shoes off and tested her feet in the nice warm slippers. And the slippers just fit just right. And she settled herself down into that old big chair and lifted the cup of coffee, and then she remembered Henry. Turned around and she said, "Henry, get on in here." And that's when she heard it. Footsteps coming toward the room, one by one. And she turned around and she said, "That couldn't be Henry, 'cause Henry drags his feet when he walks." But the footsteps stopped just in back of her chair, and then she turned around again, and as she did, a voice said, "Good evening, madam." And there, standing behind her, was a very handsomely dressed gentleman. He wore long black leather boots and a very fancy frock tail coat, as they called them in those days. There's only one thing wrong with him. He didn't have a head. But he spoke to Elvira. "Do not worry, madam. I will not harm you." And Elvira said, "Ooh, who you talking to?" Madam, so many years ago there were visitors to my home, just as you and your husband are tonight. They needed good hot food to eat and a nice warm bed to sleep in, and I provided for them, but because I did not tell them where I hid my gold, they killed me. And they buried my head in one part of the cellar and my body in the other. And I've kept this house alive and well so that two nice people would come in and help me get myself together again." Elvira said, "But I don't know anything about finding anybody's head." About that time she heard Henry coming in. "Ooh," Henry said, "it was cold out there. Ooh, just about froze to death. But I sure enough found somewhere to put..." Uh-oh. Who is that?" Well, Henry looked up and saw the headless man, and Elvira said, "Henry, that's the man who owns this house." And Henry said, "Elvira, how do you know?" And Elvira said, "Why, he told me." "He told you? What did he tell you with?" "Why, his mouth," she said. "I don't see a head. I don't even see a mouth. I don't see a mouth, so I don't see a head. How did he tell you?" Elvira said, "If you'll be quiet, he'll tell you once again." And sure enough, the headless man told the story all over again. And Henry said, "But what am I supposed to do about that?" The headless man said, "Sir, do you see that door?" And Henry said, "Yeah, I do." "Down the stairway, sir," said the headless man, "you will find a cellar. Beneath the cellar floor, somewhere you will find my head. If you will dig and find my head and put it back on my shoulders, I can rest for eternity, and I'll never bother you again." So Henry walked over to the door, opened the door, and quickly slammed it, turned around and said, "It's dark down there." "Oh, do not worry," said the headless man. "I shall provide light for you." He stepped over to the fireplace, lifted one hand into the air, then placed the other hand deep into the fire, lit the end of his finger, removed the finger from his hand, and handed it to Henry. And Henry said, "Oh, thank you." He did the same with the other hand, placed that hand high into the air, lit the end of that finger, removed the finger from his hand, and handed it to Elvira. And Elvira said, "Ooh, Thank you." They took their candles down the stairs, found picks and shovels, and dug for the rest of the night. Finally, just before the sun rose, they came up with the old man's head and placed it back onto his body. And just before he disappeared for the last time, he said, "I thank you for helping me get myself together again. As a reward, I want you to have this house and all the land around it. If you will dig in back of the old oak tree, you'll find the gold that I protected for so many years. It is yours. I'll never bother you again." And that's what happened. He went away, and Elvira and Henry lived happily ever after. And that's the end of that. Lydia, a ghost of North Carolina. It was in the 30s, on a cold and rainy morning. Lydia stopped in High Point, North Carolina, to see her father and mother. Her father was surprised. "Why are you here?" "I wanted to tell you," she said, "that I'm going to Raleigh to a dance. I am a fraternity sweetheart." "And who is the lucky young man?" "Oh," she said, as she told her father the name. Her father said, "Now just a minute. If I have told you once, I have told you 1,000 times about that family. I do not like that young man." But Lydia refused to give in. There were angry words spoken between the father and the mother and the daughter, the father and the daughter. She was so angry. She turned, left the house, got into her car, and drove into Raleigh. That night, there was something wrong. She told her date that soon after the dance, she would leave and return to High Point. "No," he said, "there's a breakfast tomorrow. I will drive home with you. Just wait." "But I cannot," she said. "My father and mother and I had an argument today, and I must apologize." "Well, call them," he said. "Just call." That night, she left the dance. All he could say was, "Be careful. It's raining." Lydia drove many miles from Raleigh to Greensboro and decided to take a shortcut on what is now the Greensboro High Point Road. At a certain spot in that road, there was a dangerous curve, a blind curve, and crossing the middle of that curve was a railroad track. Many people had named that curve Dead Man's Curve. As she approached the curve, her car stalled on the railroad track. It wouldn't move up, and it wouldn't move back. And I suppose just at the time when Lydia should have gotten out of the car, she looked up, and it was too late. There was a train on the track. She was killed. She never returned home again. Years later, they straightened that curve, and they put the railroad crossing on a bridge over the highway. In 1945, there was a young salesman headed from Greensboro very late at night into High Point. He was tired, and all he could think of was getting to a hotel room and resting for the night. As he approached what had been Dead Man's Curve, he noticed that there was something wrong with his car, and soon the car just stopped. He steered the car to the right-hand side of the road just beneath a bridge, opened the glove compartment, pulled out a flashlight, got out of the car, and raised the hood of the car. That's when he realized he knew nothing about a car. But he touched this and pulled that and shook this, when all at once he felt someone tapping him on the shoulder. He turned around, and there, standing behind him, was a young woman, dressed in an evening gown. And he said, "Whew, lady, gee, you sure did scare me. What are you doing out here?" And she said, "Please, can you take me home? Please take me home. Can you take me home?" He said, "Well, now, I'm not sure about this. I can't get my car started. I don't know what happened to it. I know absolutely nothing about a car." "Please," she said, "I must go home. You must take me home tonight." "Did you understand me?" he said. "There's something wrong here." She never said another word, but passed by him, went over to the car door, opened it, and got in. And he thought, well, but he pulled this and he shook that, and all at once he noticed that the lights of the car had come on again. Well, he thought, I've touched the right thing. Closed the hood, walked around, got into the car, and turned the keys in the ignition. The car started, and he turned to his passenger, and he said, "What are you doing out on a night like this? Did somebody put you out? Did you have an accident?" She never said, and then he realized that he hadn't introduced himself. "My name," he said, "is James. What's yours?" "Lydia." He said, "Lydia, can you tell me what happened to you?" She never said. "Where do you want to go?" Now, some say that she gave the address on Centennial Avenue in High Point. "Well," he said, "I'm aware of the street, but you'll have to show me just the right location of your house. I'm just not sure." She turned away and never said another word all the way into High Point. He found the house without her help, and he turned again and he said, "Did you have an accident?" She never said. He got out of the car and hesitated just a moment as he stepped behind the car, thinking, there's something wrong here. He walked to the passenger side and opened the door. When he did, he realized that there was nobody there. "Well, sir," he said, "that's gratitude for you." She just got out and went in the house without saying one word. But there was something wrong, he thought. Someone should know. He walked to the door and he knocked. He knocked again and again, and finally a light came on way down in the house somewhere. He could just barely see the glow. And the door opened, and a voice said, "Yes? What is it?" "Please excuse me," he said. I know it's late, but a young woman just came into this house. I picked her up on the road, on the High Point Road, just beneath the bridge. I think there's been an accident. I can't be sure." The porch light came on, and the door was opened further, and a light came on in the hallway. And there, standing before James, was an old woman. She said, "Young man, I thank you for bringing my daughter home. That was my daughter Lydia. She was killed on that spot many years ago. Many people have tried to bring her home, but just before they get her to the house, she gets out and she never comes in. Perhaps sometime when you're traveling through North Carolina and you have occasion to be on the Greensboro High Point Road, your car may stop just beneath the bridge, and somebody just may walk over to the car and say, "Would you please bring me home?" Not to worry, it's only Lydia, the ghost. If you are afraid of ghosts and scary things and things that go bump in the night, just before you get in bed, take off your shoes, place your shoes beneath your bed side by side. Then spread the toes of those shoes so that one toe points in that direction and the other toe points in that direction. One to the right and one to the left, and then nothing will bother you. You see, there's something about shoes that are spread out like that will keep these things away. Now, it works real good with sneakers and slippers and sandals and boots, but it works better with Mommy and Daddy's shoes. The Golden Arm. Now once there lived a man and his wife. The man was an ordinary man. After supper every night, he would take a seat in front of the fireplace and watch the smoke of the fire disappear beneath the chimney. He would light his pipe and watch the smoke rings curl beneath the chimney. Now, the unusual person in this family was the wife. After she finished washing the dishes and straightening the house, or whatever it was that she did after supper, she would settle down with her husband before the fire. She would take into her right hand a very soft cloth. Then she would place her hand before her chest and rub that cloth across her arm and hand, for you see, her left arm and hand were made of pure, solid gold. Every night she would polish and shine that golden arm. One night, as she polished and shined the golden arm, she said to her husband, "If anything should happen to me, I want you to promise me that you will bury me with my golden arm. If I should die before you, will you promise me that you will bury me with my golden arm?" And her husband said, "Huh? What? What does that mean?" "Yes," he said, "I promise you." Well, years and years went by, and one day the woman passed away. The night before they buried her, her husband started to think about it. "I can't let them bury that gold. Why, if I had that golden arm, I could buy myself a brand new house. If I had the gold from that golden arm, I could buy myself a brand new suit of clothes. If I had the gold from the golden arm, I could buy myself a wagon and 10 white horses." So he went to the place, and he cut off the golden arm, and they buried his wife without her golden arm. The next night, he stood in front of the fireplace, holding the golden arm, talking to himself. I've got the gold from the golden arm. I shall buy myself a brand new house. I shall buy myself a wagon and 20 white horses. I shall buy myself a brand new suit of clothes. And just then, he looked up through the window, and the sky that had been so bright and blue with stars was now dark, dark, dark. And all of a sudden, the wind started to blow harder and harder and harder. And over the sound of the wind, he heard, "Where's my golden arm?" "Oh," said he, "who is that?" "Oh," he said, "it's just my imagination. There's nobody there." But he went over to the window just to be sure, and he looked out again. And the sky was darker and darker, and the wind blew harder and harder, and the voice was louder and louder. "Who's got my golden arm?" "Oh," he said, "who knows that I have this arm? I must hide it. I must hide my golden arm." So he looked all around the house, and there was only one place, a closet. He reached toward the wall where there hung a key to the closet. He pulled the key from the wall, ran over to the closet door, opened it, and just before he stepped inside, he looked around again through the window. And the sky was darker and darker, and the wind blew harder and harder, but this time the voice was just at the front door. "Where's my golden arm?" He stepped into the closet, slammed the door, and locked the door. "Oh," he said, "I'm safe. Nobody will ever take this golden arm away from me now." But then he realized that inside the closet it was dark, dark, dark. And all around the house, the wind blew harder and harder and harder, and the door that had been locked now opened all by itself. And he could hear the voice coming across the room. "Who's got my..." "You've got my golden arm." And the ghost of his wife grabbed that golden arm, turned around, ran through the house, leaped through the window, and nobody's ever seen that ghost or the golden arm again. And that's the end of that. Buried alive. This story was told to me by an old woman. An old woman who continued to turn herself into a 5-year-old child as she told the story. I heard the story time and time again from her lips. And one day I decided someone else should hear this story. I shall tell you the story through the eyes of that 5-year-old child who was at the telling of this story 98 years old. And the old woman said to me, "Do you see that house? Do you see that old house there? That's the old house where I grew up. I had 8 brothers and sisters. If you'll step just a bit closer," she said, "you can see up through the loft. That's where we all slept, excepting me, I was the baby. And every night my brothers and sisters would pull the covers off of me, and I'd run downstairs to my mama and my daddy, and I'd get in bed with them, and my daddy said to my mama one night, 'We got to get her out of here.' So my daddy built me a bed right in front of the fireplace, and my mama piled it full of quilts. Why, there was so many covers on that bed sometimes I couldn't even turn over, but I kept good and warm. And every morning when I'd wake up, I'd look over toward the fireplace, and my mama would be stirring in a great big pot of grits. Ooh, I used to think them grits had such a smell. I didn't know till I was grown that grits didn't have no smell. I used to say to my mama, 'I want to get up. I'm hungry.' And my mama would come up and she'd pick me up. And she'd give me the first bowl of grits. But I remember one morning waking up, looking toward the fireplace, and my mama wasn't there. There wasn't even no fire in the fireplace. And I looked around, and there was my papa and my brothers and sisters, and they were just standing around. And I said, "Papa, where's Mama? I'm cold. I want to get up." And Papa said, "Now, child, there ain't no fire in the fireplace. Just stay on in the bed and stay wrapped up good." "But I want to get up. I'm hungry. Where's Mama?" So Papa told my sister Sally to put my dress on, and she did. And my papa said, "Now listen, old Doc's coming today, and I want you to stand outdoors and tell Doc how to come on in." But I said, "Papa, Doc's been here before. He know how to get in. Now go on out there, girl." Now, I just remembered old Doc used to give me candy out of his pocket. It would be good candy after I picked the lint off of it. So I'd go out and I'd wait on old Doc, 'cause I'd get me a piece of candy. Well, I waited and I waited. And after a while I saw Doc and his wagon, and I waved at Doc, but Doc didn't seem to see me. He just stopped that wagon and run right in past me and didn't give me no candy neither. So I went out to the gate, decided I'd wait on Doc, and I was petting his horse, when all at once I heard something on the inside that I'd never heard before. It was mighty strange. It sounded like my papa. And all I can hear was, "No, please, no, no." And I opened the front door, and I stepped inside. And it was my papa. And he was crying. And my sisters and brothers were all crying too. And I said, "Papa, why are you crying?" And nobody could say anything to me. But the bedroom door was opened. So I stepped inside just in time to see Doc pulling the covers back over Mama. And I said, "Doc, is Mama cold? There ain't no fire in the fireplace." But old Doc just shook his head, and seemed to me when I passed by, I saw him wiping tears out of his eyes. But I went over to the bed and I grabbed my mama's hand and I said, "Get up, Mama, I'm hungry." And I put Mama's hand to my face, and she was nice and warm. And about that time, my papa come in and he grabbed me and he said, "Now, you sit out here and don't you move." And I said, "Yes, sir." And they closed my mama's door. And after a long time, my sister Sally went down the road and the women came back. The women who lived down the road, they all knew my mama. They had boxes and bags, and they went into Mama's room and they locked the door. And then my papa told my brother Joseph to go over and get Mr. John and stay with him. He'd know what to do. Mr. John was the man who built cabinets and wagons and all kinds of things. And I said, "Papa, can I go with Joseph?" And my papa said, "I told you to sit still now. Sit down." And I said, "Yes, sir." And after a while, I heard a wagon coming down the road. And I ran over to the window, and sure enough, it was Mr. John and my brother Joseph. But they had something on the back of the wagon, and I couldn't quite see what it was. And I stood up on my tiptoes, but I still couldn't see. But I didn't have long to wait, 'cause they backed that wagon into the porch. And I could see it then. It was a long white pine box. And I said, "What's that, Papa?" And Mr. John and my brother Joseph brought it in, and they unlocked Mama's door, and they took it in my Mama's room and closed the door again. And after a long time, all the women came out. And my papa put 2 chairs in front of the fireplace, and they brought that box out. And all the folks went to the front porch, and they all left me a-sitting there beside the box. And I wondered what was in that box. So I just picked up my chair, and I went over and I set that chair in front of the box. And I stood up on the chair, and I turned the nail on that box, and I pushed the top open. And I looked inside, and there was my mama. She had on her pretty blue dress with that pretty white collar. And I said, "Mama, get up, I'm hungry." And about that time, my papa come in, slammed the top of that box, turned the nail, and said, I told you to sit down there, and don't you move." And I said, "Yes, sir." The next day, we all got onto the wagon with Mama's box. And I said, "Papa, where we going?" Papa said, "We're going to the church." And I rode on the back of the wagon with my Mama's box. And when we got to the church, everybody got off and they took my Mama's box in the church. And I don't know what happened, 'cause I fell asleep. But my sister Sally woke me up and she said, "Wake up. Wake up now, it's all over." And I said, "What's all over?" And I looked around and I couldn't find my Mama's box. I knew it was on the wagon, so I ran out to the wagon, and I was going to be the first one on the wagon. I leaped up into the air, and my papa caught me, and he said, "We're not going to ride this time, child. We go walk." And everybody walked behind Papa's wagon. But I didn't know why Mr. John's mules was pulling Papa's wagon. Them 2 old white mules of Mr. John's. And Mr. John walked along beside the wagon, guiding the horses down the road. And them old mules went slower and slower. And just as we got to the bridge, they stopped. And Mr. John said, "Get on there. Go on now, go on." But the mules wouldn't move, and they finally laid down. And Mr. John brought the whip back and handed it to Papa and said, "Get 'em off that bridge, Jim. They your mules." And my papa went over and he beat them mules, and he beat them mules till my sister Sally said, "Papa, don't beat 'em no more. They don't want to go." And they picked up Mama's box, and they carried it across the river. And it was cold, and it was dirty, and it was muddy, and my papa kept a-crying. And I said, "Papa, can I ride back on the wagon with Mama's box?" And that's when Papa realized that he hadn't told me that Mama couldn't come home no more. He said, "We've got to leave her here." And I must have cried myself to sleep. I cried all the way home, 'cause I couldn't believe they were leaving my mama there in that mud and that dirt. And when I woke up, it was dark. It was dark in the room. And I was in my own bed. But there was one candle burning on the mantelpiece. And when I looked around, I saw my papa standing at the window. And I heard him saying something. He was talking to himself. And it sounded like he was saying, "I wish this night were over. I wish this night were over. There's something wrong here. Something ain't natural out there." And I sat up on one elbow and I listened. And I heard Papa's old hunting hounds. And they were saying, "Ow! Ow!" My papa said, "Stop that. Just stop that." And he walked across the door. And that's when he heard it. Ooh-hoo-hoo-hoo-hoo-hoo. Ooh-hoo-hoo-hoo-hoo-hoo. And Papa said, "Go away from there. Get out of that tree. Go on." And then we heard something else. The screen door opening. And we heard the voice. "Jim, Jim, open the door. I'm hurt. You must open the door." My papa said, "Go away from there. I ain't opening no door tonight. Go away from there." And I looked up at Papa, and I said, "Papa, that's Mama. That's Mama. Open the door." And I leaped down from my bed, and my papa said, "Don't you touch that door." But by that time, I had lifted the latch on the door. And there, standing in the door, was my mama. And I said, "Mama, Mama, you've come home. Papa said you wouldn't be home." And my mama didn't seem to see me. She walked right on past me. And when she did, I saw the front of her dress. There was blood all over her dress. And my papa was backing away across the middle of the room. "Elvie," he said, "go back. Go back to that grave. You shouldn't ought to be here. Go on back now." My mama said, Jim, listen. It's me. I'm alive. I told you to be careful. I told you that someday somebody was going to bury me alive. I told you about that sleeping sickness that I had. I told you to be careful. Papa said, "But Elvie, how'd you get out of that grave?" Mama said, "Listen, I heard everything. I could feel, but I couldn't speak. I felt it when one of my young'uns tugged on my hand when I was still in the bed. I felt them when they was lowering me down in that box. I even heard that old door slam shut, and I tried my best to speak. And I knew when I was going down in that grave, and I tried then to let somebody know. and I could hear that dirt falling in on me, but I couldn't say one word. All I could think was, my God, are you gonna let me die like this? And I felt that cold creeping in on me. And then I heard something else. I heard digging and scraping and voices. And after a while I felt something warm. And then I felt somebody tugging at my hand. And then I realized it was somebody trying to remove my ring, trying to get my ring from my finger. And when they couldn't get my finger to move, 'cause it was stiff and swollen, they just took cold steel to my hand and they cut off my finger. And that must have brought me back, 'cause I sat up. And when I did, it scared 'em away. It was grave robbers. It was grave robbers. And I just come out of that grave and I come home. Well, that made my papa mad. And he went over to the fireplace and he grabbed the shotgun and he said, "Did you see 'em? I'll kill 'em. Just name 'em." My mama said, "No. Don't you understand? If it hadn't been for them, I would never been able to come home. I'll never tell who they were." And my mama never told. But I think I always knew, 'cause every Sunday morning me and my mama would walk in church, and my mama would stop right at the back of the church and speak to two old men who were cousins, and she'd speak polite, "How you do?" And they'd speak polite to my mama, "Fine, thank you." And I'd see my mama rubbing that place where her finger used to be. Promised my mama, though, that I'd make sure that when she passed on, I'd have 4 or 5 doctors pronounce her dead. I kept my promise. But you know, my dad did something a little strange. Went out into the woods and he cut down an old oak tree and seasoned it out for a long time. Then he carved the shapes of them 2 old white mules and put 'em right there on our porch. That's where they stand to this day. 'Cause you know, they say it was them mules that knew my mama wasn't dead, wouldn't cross that bridge with her box. They say animals know. But I promised my mama that nobody would ever bury her alive, and they didn't. And that's the end of that.